really excited for today's episode. I mean, Doug, you and I got to meet in a previous podcast, which is, if I'm privileged to do multiple ones of these, I'll call this my chapter 2 with you, or my second office hours with the professor. But learned so much from you, and I think a lot of people got a big dose of what I've been following in your Substacks and your writings for over a year now at the Amazing AI on the Lot event this last month in LA, where you did the keynote. And I think a lot of people that didn't know you came up to me afterwards. They're like, wait, he kind of said all the things that we've been trying to figure out for a while. So I think you represent a very interesting voice in the community to me, in that you simultaneously are hyper aware of what's happening. I think you stare at these matrix zeros and ones, as a lot of us do, but you have this backing of sort of knowing where we've been, so to speak. Where has this media business been? Where's the legacy business has been? People will be linked to your keynote, so anybody that wants to get that full dose, we'll include it in what we post. But I'm excited today to kind of catch up to where you are. I know you're writing a book. Some of us have gotten to see the first chapter, and I almost want to pretend like today we're getting to either get a taste of where your head's at on this evolving project of yours, which is this real-time topic of ours. But also, let's get into the later chapters. Where are you starting to imagine the pattern settling, or starting to evolve? But really excited to talk to you today.
Yeah, well, thank you for all of that, and I think as you're kind of alluding to, the Substack is meant to be kind of a living, breathing mental model around how the media business is evolving, and so it's great to be able to think in public and get feedback and use that feedback to kind of harden up these arguments a little bit. But it's gonna it's a never ending work in progress.
So maybe to take us straight into this recent Substack piece of yours, the trust is the new oil. I think for anybody that hasn't read all your stuff, and they will after we drop all the links, you've been coming from a legacy media background, kind of being in that strategy, almost like research role, sort of looking at playing that role for Turner in the past. And I think so. You noticed when Netflix was coming. I think it became very clear to you what the effect of the creator economy has been, and you've set up some really amazing foundational frameworks to understand the past and now the present. And we'll make sure folks get to read that stuff. But what does that mean to you, that trust is the new oil? Where does that statement speak to this bigger thesis that you're working on?
Yeah, well, fair warning, I haven't talked about this piece a lot, and I find I don't do a great job of encapsulating it, in a pithy way. But the basic idea is, I said that line kind of in passing. I don't know if I said it for the first time at that AI on a Lot presentation, or if it was another time, but it just sort of was one of those kind of brain worms that once I said it, it sort of stuck with me. And it's a lot of how I decide what to write about it. That's the genesis of it. It's kind of like a little seed of an idea that takes root. So the basic concept is that the whole web economy is based on the monetization of attention, and that has had some positive benefits. It's funded a lot of content, but we all know what the negative consequences are of it too, and dopamine loops and rage bait and clickbait and misinformation and all this kind of stuff, right? So it already feels like we're in kind of the late stages of this strip mining of our attention, and then you have AI come in. And I think that AI is likely to devalue attention for two reasons. One is that there's just going to be so much noise in the system that I think the signal to noise ratio is going to decline. So for advertisers, that's a problem. I think they're not going to be able to rely as much on the value of the attention that they're getting online. I think, and the second reason is that I think increasingly people are going to use AI to manage AI, and I make this reference in the piece to, I don't know if, this is probably before your time, but when I was a kid, there was this movie Real Genius with Val Kilmer, and I don't know if there's this kind of running gag throughout the movie where there's this impossibly hard science class, and they keep on cutting back to it as the students kind of progressively replace themselves with tape recorders. And by the very end of the movie, the whole class is tape recorders and the professor's a tape recorder. So you basically have like a tape recorders talking to tape recorders. And I think that's what's going to happen online too, is you're going to have AIs talking to AIs with humans kind of, abstracted away on either side of that. And so that's also going to devalue advertising, because any ad that gets mediated by an AI is basically valueless. So the question then becomes, if and I'm not saying the attention economy goes away or the value of attention is going to go to zero, but if you think that the value of attention will go down, then the next question is, well, what's going to replace that? And that's where it starts to get a little bit more speculative. But what I speculate in this piece is that we're going to go from this attention economy to an action economy, so that people aren't going to be paying, advertisers won't be paying just for the hope that someone's going to see something and do something, but they're actually going to pay for people doing things. And people will only do things when they trust the source, or they will only empower their agents, or their chatbots or whatever, to when they trust the source. So it's a long way of saying that I think in this environment where there's going to be basically infinite content, infinite noise, the most important thing is going to be the trust that the source of content can build up. And then you get into other questions about different kinds of trust, and there's signal-based trust, and there's earned trust. But overall, it was really meant to be kind of a hopeful piece, because if you start to think through what would happen if everybody online was not trying to just gain the most attention, but actually earn trust over time, that would be a very different web than what we have today.
I love that, and I think in the way you started laying it out in the piece, you allude to the statement that I think at one point I thought Mark Andreessen took credit for it, but I think you corrected me with your link. Ethan Zuckerman, is that the
Yeah, he's the original guy. Yeah, the original sin of the internet. Yeah.
Could you introduce that? Because I think that connects. It speaks to this bigger scope that maybe what's happening is sort of, I don't know if maybe it's optimistic, like you say. I don't know if it's fixing things, but it does speak to something that never really worked perfectly in the first place.
Right. So this guy, Ethan, I guess Zuckerberg, writing in The Atlantic over a decade ago, coined this concept of the original sin of the internet. And the idea is that the internet was the foundation of the internet is open protocols. You have HTTP for hypertext links, and HTML for markup language, and SMTP for the way that email works. And the reason why you can use your email, you use whatever email client you want, is because of POP, right, or whatever. There's all these different open protocols. There were no protocols for payments, though. There's also no protocol for identity. And so as a result, there was no native way to pay for stuff online. And so the only really viable model was to sell advertising, to sell, again, the promise of action as opposed to actually doing something. So, you get into these questions, and I think Mark Andreessen or Chris Dixon, when they would talk about the original sin of the internet, that becomes a bridge to extolling the virtues of crypto, and how people will have whatever we can talk about stable coins, and there will be there will eventually be native payments online, and blah blah. But it does if you go back to the concept, what I think what Zuckerberg was saying, Zuckerman, I can't remember his name now, was saying that
Zuckerman, I'm referencing your
right,
piece. Yeah.
Right, yeah. So that the lack of native payments set us down this path where advertising had to be the basis of the web economy, and there have been a lot of negative externalities around that I was mentioning before, surveillance capitalism and the attention economy, and all these kind of, Jonathan Haidt writing about how social media is degrading the mental health of young adults, and all those kinds of things are basically the consequence of the fact that the way we fund the internet is through our attention.
And that's really interesting, and I think again, it's interesting to point to something that already speaks to concerns people have, the Jonathan Haidt of it all. And I did originally hear that conversation about the original sin in the context of the Web3 crypto thing. And I think what was interesting to me in that conversation was it also spoke to the notion of what gets made, what content ends up becoming subsidized by advertising, and what does that mean to the type of content that gets made. So when the driver is an advertiser, when the driver is the things that then fund content, then it's the will of that advertiser or the spirit of that advertising industry, which is often very broad. There's an instinct to tell stories to everyone. So, and that's kind of what broadcast TV has always been. In some ways, that's a Main Street America, or sort of central, trying to appease lots of different advertising targets. I think that the conversation I was listening to was that if you take that mindset or that assumption out, that everything has to be explained by advertising and what gets subsidized by advertising dollars, you almost start to look at something like what HBO was in its infancy, that there was this thing that maybe it just was in and of itself worth somebody's individual money. And it was like, we take it for granted with all the streaming conversations, but that was, to most of us, our first real, like, I'm paying for that because I wanted experience on cable TV. And what did that create? It created The Sopranos, shows that would have never existed in the first place, shows that were inherently neat, like Girls from Lena Dunham, which I don't think was ever a big rating success, but it created a setting where all that stuff thrived. And I think, to borrow what seemed to be Netflix's initial, drive, was that they were trying to steal HBO's model, creating a premium model. Like, I think most people like that. I think that was a new thing the market discovered it was allowed to like too, is things that weren't necessarily, CSI, LA, or shows that are meant to somehow appease to the broadest possible audience. There were things that were meant to appease to individual communities, and I think that's where this notion of community economy has come up when I hear this trust is the new oil argument. I wonder, does that resonate with how this is also a content conversation?
Yeah, for sure. I think that it's definitely a content conversation. I think that there's a tension between attention and trust. Like, I take it, so I write a Substack, and my sense, at least the way that I write it that's authentic to me, is I go out and try, I through some process, I encounter what I think is an important question, right? And what I mean by important question is something that sort of on the frontier of knowledge, meaning it's it's a critical leverage point that's going to move the conversation forward in some way, right? And that's what interests me, and then I go and try to wrestle that to the ground, and then I press publish. And so I'm not putting things out 3 times a week, 4 times a week. I'm not trying to drive the maximum amount of volume, but what I would hope is, my goal is that when someone gets an email from me, they're like, all right, I should probably at least read it. It's probably going to be, hopefully it's interesting enough to read the TLDR and see, should I make an investment in this or not? So I'm effectively building trust. My content strategy, which I would say is definitely not a strategy, but my approach to content is, again, something that's authentic to me, but is intended to build the trust of the reader, because someone has to trust me in order to pay for something, which is very different than just being the loudest and and attracting the most attention, and which leads to things like people being outrageous. And so you take that on the one hand, if you take the extremes, that ideally you could have both, right? Ideally you have volume and you have quality and quantity at the same time. And you can see that there are creators who are quite prolific, but have built up a very trusted relationship, like Alex Cooper, or there's just an example. I was watched something the other day where she was talking about some endorsement that she turned down for like $7 million or something like that because it wasn't authentic to her. And I think Mr. Beast is also very careful about that. I think that the smartest creators, even the ones who are very prolific, are very are really working overtime to make sure that what they're doing is authentic to their brands, which is really about trust. So, I'm taking it into like kind of the creator end of the continuum. But to your question, yeah, I mean, that is what HBO wasn't trying to put out the most number of shows. It was trying to make sure that each thing it did, it was very precious about everything it did. It was trying to create that same like very high trust with the consumer. So yeah, that's what I meant is if you take these kind of two extremes and we get to a future, you think about someone who's just trying to make the most noise and be the most outrageous or the most enraging or whatever on the one hand, and someone who's trying to provide a, high value information. Those are the two ends of the spectrum. And I think the reality is that there's, the optimization point is probably somewhere in the.
Do you think that this matters to like the average consumer? I guess like it makes me think about blue checks. Do people care about blue checks? Elon blew them up. At the same time, like I know that I want like trusted sources. I know that I want to know if like the video that I saw from Ukraine or wherever is real. But then I think everybody is, social media has just like exploded our brains such that, I don't care. I just want whatever fuels my rage, and I'll go to the next thing. And, and like, I wonder, is AI going to accelerate that, or is it going to cause us to want to, to have to find things to trust because we're just so insane? Like, is it going to hit a tipping point and everybody's gonna be like, all right, I can't do, or are we just going to go further and further out into the abyss,
I think it depends on what job someone is trying to get done when they seek out media, right? So you think about this concept of jobs to be done, that people hire products or services to do a job in their life. And media does very different jobs. You can think about what is the job you're trying to do when you're looking for a movie to watch with your family on a Saturday night versus what is the job you want media to do when you had a tough day and your boss yelled at you and you like come home and slump on the couch, right? And so sometimes there's social jobs and there's emotional jobs and there's cognitive jobs, right, where you're trying to actually learn something. There's jobs like identity reinforcement, right? I'm gonna watch. I'm the kind of person who likes A24 films, therefore I'll watch A24 films, right? Or I want to feel better about myself, so I'm going to watch these housewives because they are a hot mess and they make me feel superior. So there's all these different jobs, and I think that it depends on what job you're asking. I think there's still going to be people will want to, have their own ideas reinforced and slip into their echo chamber and hear some outrageous person on their side of the political spectrum saying something they want to hear. I think, they will want to kind of slip into that dopamine drip and flick, and not care as much about the provenance or the accuracy of what they're watching. It's just kind of sensational. And then there's going to be people who have, it could be the same person at a different time. It's like, I actually really want to understand what's happening in the Ukraine. And so I can only understand that if I need to be able to trust the source, or not even trust the source as being impartial, but trust that I know what the source's position is. Like the source could say like, I'm on the left or I'm on the right. That's what I am. And you're like, okay, well, I got it. I understand your perspective, and therefore I can interpret what you're saying through that lens. But anyway, so I think media is not a monolithic thing. We're not trying to get the same thing done every time we engage with a piece of media. And I think there's going to be certain use cases or jobs or whatever you want to call it where trust is critically important.
To go back to your idea of the action economy versus attention economy, that's really interesting to me because, a lot of people speculate that, the sort of gaming culture is starting to merge with passive consumption culture, whether it's interactivity or immersive things, as things that might be uniquely AI attributes that are, potentially on the horizon. But I think about also your point that one of the ways the attention economy has been leveraged is this outrage machine, this sort of easy way to sort of get clickbait. It just makes me wonder if I think about the first video games I played in the arcade, they usually had two buttons. It was just sort of like left or right, or it was very simple. And obviously, games have become a lot more evolved now. And there's a lot of different things. Just frankly, the joysticks have lots of buttons on them now besides just two buttons. And I almost wonder if even the nature of the experiences we've had have been very binary in the first place. They're either like or dislike. I'm either clicking on it or not, or I'm turning my remote control on or not. It's always been this very simple binary that is easy to then monetize and turn into, it's easier to outrage people into sort of watching your cable news channel or, following your feed. I wonder if AI and the new UIs that are coming out of all this, I wonder if they're going to create different types of actions that aren't just like or dislike. I wonder if they're going to create different types of data that becomes valuable to some, business on the other side, that it's about where I traveled in my real-time environment. Which choices did I make crafting or not in my Minecraft game? I don't know. I just wonder if that's actually a way to think about this action economy point, is that it becomes a new thing that we do that becomes valuable. Mm-hmm. Maybe it's a thing that a community does. Maybe it's things that an individual does. Does any of that stuff resonate of what you think might be native to this technology?
It's an interesting idea. I was counting on you, Fred, to have a couple of no. Interesting's good, like a little left fieldy, but in a good way. I guess I would give you a more general thought, which is that a lot of media historically was constrained by technology. And when you move into these, where the arrow is toward, we're moving from basically discrete functions to continuous functions, where you only had a couple of, if you think about let's go to extremes where the birth of mass media, you had 3 television channels. And so you had 3 choices and that was it. That was 4 choices you could not watch, or you could watch one of the 3 things that were on. That was it. And we've been moving in the direction of, obviously vastly whatever. Today we have what seems like basically infinite choice, but even the idea of, these big shared cultural experiences, in my generation, I think we're kind of nostalgic for those kinds of things. And I remember when the MASH finale was on, and everyone in the country, 130 million people watched it or whatever it was. It's not necessary. That's not necessarily the natural state of things, right? It could be that was really just a function of the limited number of choices, and really media should take on. Maybe we're going to have the Minecraftification of all media, in the sense that you'll have one media property, Minecraft, where you have an individual experience, and then maybe it's mostly individual, and then every now maybe you share it with a small group, or maybe you actually post it online and a lot of people consume it, and then maybe there's a movie that's the canon or whatever. And so I think you're going to have this just blurring. If you think about media is all comprising just a handful of primitives, right? I mean, it's text, it's image, it's audio. That's it. Those are the building blocks of all media. And so all of the distinctions between different formats and what's short form and long form, was there interesting Bandersnatch, which is video that changes when you do something, and a video game, which is video that changes when you do something, right? Why is one a show and one is a game? There's all of these definitions of things are going to get increasingly, I think, porous and tenuous, and we're going to have a lot of new stuff that we don't really know exactly what to call it. A lot of these distinctions, the piece I published today is about how a lot of these distinctions are just an artifact of, these sort of old, these old distribution silos. And once they came down, it's a lot of the distinctions that exist in the media world, in regulations or institutions or definitions or even language or whatever, are all these kind of old weird artifacts that are going to go away. So I think we're going to have a very blurry. There's going to be almost like an infinite number of different ways that we can interact with media, and so yeah, like is there going to be value in the data of how we do things? Is that going to be? Yeah, probably it will. I think that it's going to be a much less. I think it's going to be a much less rigid media world in the future.
Yeah, no, I think there's something to continue musing on the action economy. I think that's a really great choice of a way to label what could be more dynamic and more interesting and more valuable, like you say. And I think this, going back to why do you trust anything, and how do you express your trust? It's by doing things, not just staring at them. And I think I think we mentioned A24 as well as another like HBO like content experience that I think has built up a lot of trust, and it didn't come from sort of very simple binary thinking and sort of very simple. I think they've over time built up something very valuable.
Yeah, you think about it
seems
as a
well positioned.
consumer, right? You think about it as a consumer, and you watch your first A24 movie, and you're like, oh, maybe you're like even minorly aware of the logo at the very beginning, but then you see that, and it was a good movie, but at that point, maybe A24 doesn't mean that much to you, and then you see your next A24 movie, and you're like, huh, A24. By the third or fourth one, it's the same reason you subscribe to Ben Thompson's Trajectory. Like once you read the third or fourth or fifth or whatever number of things it is that you're like, wow, that was really valuable. That's how trust is built.
What are you hearing in terms of how, like, we have so many people in our community that I think follow people like Doug. What do you think is on their sort of like their horizon line of what they're trying to build as individual creators, and how does this type of thinking affect the way they start to build? We always talk about how it seems like everybody seems to keep chasing an old model. Like everybody's so excited to, whether it's to replace Hollywood or be the Pixar of the future. It's like, isn't it more interesting if something totally new comes out of this? And isn't that more likely? What happens when something this cataclysmic feeling? What do you think is on the minds of like the creators that sort of see these trends like Doug is saying?
Well, you kind of buried the lead there, Fred, but I think there is that element of, hey, there are people who are looking for web series to create characters on socials. There's people who are chasing film and TV, to your point. I mean, my impression of the AI creators, that bubble, is they're just trying to make money, and they're just trying to figure out what are the opportunities. They're split between education, client work, and trying to make their own IP. And at the same time, trying to figure out how do all these mediums merge? How does being able to create a short film faster and cheaper than ever converge with I don't know, micro dramas and all these other opportunities where people are actually making money? But I don't know that anybody, as far as I can tell, has landed on anything. It feels like very shaky ground. It feels like sand. I mean, I'm here in Europe, and like I definitely feel like it's kind of the same types of dilemmas that I see when we're in New York or LA, and so it still feels very small, actually. The community of people creating AI content feels to be a lot smaller than I would have expected. Like 2 years ago when this first started, I thought everybody was going to jump in. I don't think that's quite happened, and maybe it's because the tools are still hard. But yeah, I don't see that changing. And at the same time, to converge with this trust conversation, somebody is spoofing Mark Rubio, right? And pretending to be him, speaking of, taking action and, spoofing trust, right? Someone is doing that. And I don't know where that converges with this stuff. It feels, I remember having this distinct feeling a year ago that, is Hollywood pushing us to the brink of, a simulation? Because Hollywood will not pay for AI that isn't good. So Hollywood wants really high fidelity, high quality content and coming out of these AI models. And what results from that is everybody being able to, spoof Mark Rubio or, create fake humans that everybody believes are real. So I don't know. I don't know where that converges, but yeah, that's what comes up for me when you ask me that.
think like you led your point, Doug, before that there's a optimism underlying or maybe maybe it was the word hope you used, and I think so many people that I think responded to your event your speech today and a lot we're industry people. I think they weren't necessarily the lone creator that's discovering their way and building a different narrative. And I think those people are mostly like what Min was just saying. There's people that are genuinely just focused on jobs and money. And I just
Yeah.
saw another media conglomerate today go up for sale. So the floor has not been found in what a lot of the legacy industry is going through. I think layoffs will continue in some scary ways. So if there is hope or optimism, all this, what does it start to look like? Not to say that you're here to deliver that oracle message. I'm just saying, what do we actually feel hopeful about? I think I feel it at the education level. There are a lot of students that backlash on this stuff. I think some people watch The Mountainhead like it might be a documentary. There's a lot of things that aren't necessarily instantly welcoming about some of these tools. I think some of us have spent enough time with them that they seem like at least obligatory to learn about and figure out what values do they pose. I think that's my neutral feeling on all this stuff. Is I don't know where it's going, but I know that I should learn it. What is that? That trust is the new oil meme or this action economy theme. What does it start to look like of what it could mean to people that are worried about jobs and industry?
Yeah, well, I think Min used the word sand. It is still shifting. I don't think anybody, it's interesting that Darren Aronofsky's production company is called Primordial Soup because that's where we are. We're in this kind of primordial phase right now, and things are bubbling, and life hasn't really formed, and it's a very uncertain and unstable time, and if you're in the business, it's it's extremely stressful and anxiety inducing, not knowing where things are going, not know where your company is going. So the way I think about it is, number one, everyone should confront this head on. Technology, there's no really way to stop technology, and so I that's the first thing. I think the second thing is what you said, Fred, that it is incumbent on everyone to learn how to use these tools. And then the third thing is to kind of try to see through all this change to, what is enduring, what is still going to be, and it's something I talk about a lot, this idea of what will be scarce when content is infinite. And there's a lot of things on that list, at the heart of a lot of them is trust, and so and I think the other thing that's hopeful for people who are storytellers is that the storytelling will be, obviously everyone talks about this, will be more accessible than ever. And you'll be able to do things permissionlessly. You won't need the permission of a studio. You'll be able to tell your story and get it out to anywhere. I think that you're going to see much broader representation around the world, markets that have been, how many Steven Spielbergers are there in the, depressed areas of Mumbai or, Lagos or, whatever, right? That there's this phrase, the lost Einsteins, people who have lived and died who could have been an Einstein if they had access to the right resources, and in the future people will have access to those resources, and maybe you'll be able to create that movie on your phone, right? With with an AI model that's stored locally, and who knows where this is all going. I don't have any great, palliative for the industry. Maybe that's the wrong word, palliative, mixing a palliative care. But I don't have the answer that's going to make everybody feel better. I think that there's always opportunity in chaos, and I think the people who are clear-headed and focused are going to be much more likely to find those opportunities than the ones who aren't.
Do you think this the power imbalance, for lack of better wording, leans to tech again. I think you mentioned in the AI and a lot talk that, Netflix is probably one of the most powerful companies, if not the most powerful company in Hollywood now. Like now you have AI, and now even we also have Chinese models who are, blowing the American companies out of the water every few weeks. Is that where we're headed, where even tech leans even more heavily, its shadow leans even more heavily over entertainment in Hollywood and even the creator economy, like these 3 or 4 factors now?
Generally, yeah. That when content becomes even more abundant, the curation is going to become even more important. So that ability to influence what people see and do is going to grow even more in value if that's imaginable. And it'll be interesting to see how they, it'll be interesting to see a few things. One is how do they manage the tsunami themselves, right? Does the sheer volume of content actually degrade the value of algorithmic recommendations to the point where the needle starts to move back toward editorial curation, right? Like, if you think about what's happened in the last few years, you may have seen this talk that Jack Conte gave at South by Southwest about the death of the follower, right? The rise of the feed on TikTok, on Reels, and to a degree on YouTube has reduced the importance of having an actual relationship with the creator, of subscribing and following, because people are just like, going to their feed and that's what they do. Is the feed going to be devalued? And if the feed is all algorithmically driven, right? So if is the feed going to be devalued and the needle swinging back toward people having trusted relationships, and are we going to go from from follow to feed and back from feed to follow? Like, that's a possible thing. You can go out there and say, well, yeah, maybe it's tech, but not the tech that we have today, or could you, let's go really far out there and say, layer on a whole bunch of kind of technological vectors and say, okay, you're going to have a wearable that's going to know everything about you and your, biometrics, and watch what, it's going to know what happened to you that day. You're going to have your own database, your own data repository that is behind some kind of cryptographic, a firewall that knows, everything you watch, everything you listen to. And so all of a sudden you have this database that you now expose to a trusted agent, and you say to the agent, I want you to be I want you to go out and curate for me, so that instead of going to YouTube or Reels or wherever, that you're going to have an agent that goes out and actually curates all your content for you based on what it knows that you like and what you're interested in and what kind of day you had. And you can just kind of go crazy with it thinking here. So maybe the power shifts toward these curation agents and away from the platforms where the kind of algorithmic curation that they do is pretty it's a pretty blunt tool, right? Like, the collaborative filtering of like, oh, people who watch this also like this, therefore we're going to show it to you. Like, that's not, that is not nearly as sophisticated as truly personalized curation could eventually be. So I would say yes, that technology is going to have, and this is where you get into the primordial part, right? Like, you, on the one hand, you'd say, okay, technology gets even more important in curating information. Maybe not the technology that we're familiar with today. Maybe there's a new intermediary layer between the consumer and the platform, this idea of an agent. Maybe the needle swings back toward, trusted human curation, because in this world of infinite content, the only thing you can trust is, is a person, right? I mean, if you think about, like, the most successful creators today, that's what they are. They've become these really trusted curators of merchandise, of information, of other creators. That's a lot of the most successful creators now are really making more money as curators of other things, not just sheerly by the number of views they generate.
Yeah, because they have to make money outside of also because they have to
Outside of
make money
YouTube.
outside of the YouTube. Well, it's funny because
Yeah.
what that makes me think about two things, which is one, that Mr. Beast, he created this YouTube AI thumbnails app, and then he had to take it down and like
Yeah.
funnel it back to humans because of his audience. And that is an interesting dilemma that, the anti-AI community came out in force. Maybe there are a lot of bots, who knows, but they came out and he had to bend, and that's an interesting dynamic.
I think that was very specific though,
Yeah.
because he was basically making it easy to rip off other people's thumbnails. It's like, if you see a good thumbnail, we
Right.
have this tool where you can just put your face in the thumbnail instead. And I think people were like, well, I think people didn't like. Yeah, I don't know how much of it was that was AI or what that tool was encouraging people to do.
Yeah.
But anyway, so yeah, I mean, that's a whole other. I mean, you're raising another question: is what is really the consumer acceptance for all this stuff, and for which use cases? And but I cut you off. Sorry, I don't know if that's where you're going or not.
No, I think it does tug on a lot of threads, and at the same time, it made me think about like the blogosphere, because I remember in like the late 2000s, everybody was like, "Oh my god, the blogosphere is going to take over, and we are gonna be inundated with content." And then, lo and behold, it was the New York Times that threaded the needle of noise and became Signal. Like it was like New York Times came back, and now it's a gaming company as well. But I always thought that was kind of interesting, and I wonder if is that gonna repeat itself in a world of AI with the Disneys, the WBs, Foxes, and Paramounts of the world? Are the studios gonna be able to become trust, and because that's what I feel like the New York Times became. When in the beginning the blogosphere was interesting, and of course Substack exists and continues to exist, but like the blogosphere seemed to indicate that there was going to be so much content that it was going to blow traditional media out of the water. And what happened was that it created so much noise that the New York Times was trusted. And so like are we just seeing almost like the 3.0 version of what happened in the late 2000s, with New York Times? Like and that converges as well with the Mr. Beast dilemma, which is that he has to respond to his audience. So there's two different kind of models in my head, I guess, which is you have the brands that are almost traditional, they hold a certain amount of values, and then the brands, Mr. Beast, which are almost like flexible. He has his values, of course, but he also is more like a creator in the traditional sense, and he's born of that audience interactive world,
Yeah, I would say they're the same thing. I think both of them need to forge a trusted relationship with their customers. They need to have a brand promise. I think in the case of Mr. Beast, because of who he is and where he comes from, and he's not a whatever 100 and something year old institution, like he's willing to just try more stuff, and he's throwing more shit against the wall, and so like he's more likely to slip up because he's just trying, because he's willing to do so much experimentation. But at the end of the day, the New York Times has a brand promise. He has a brand promise, and I think it's really critically important for both of them to adhere to that. And sometimes you can push the brand promise in a new direction, or you can see where how far it extends. But ultimately, to me, those are kind of the same things. And I do, you have this power law dynamic where there's only going to be a few people at the very head of the curve. I mean, the difference, you think about like the blogosphere, and you'd say, well, the New York Times emerged as the trusted source. Like, well, so did, for a certain audience, so did Ben Shapiro, so did the Free Press, and so did, whatever. Like, there are trusted sources that have emerged from the tail of, self-distribution or the creator economy, whatever you want to call it. But I think that what they all have in common is they have a very clear, call it a brand promise, call it a point of view. They stand for something, and then they consistently deliver against that thing. Like that's ultimately what trust, I think, is about, is I stand for something, and the stuff I do is going to consistently adhere to what I stand for. So trust doesn't necessarily mean like impartiality, as I was saying before. It just means like I'm consistently, I believe in something, I stand for it, and then I'm gonna deliver on that day in and day out.
Super interesting. I mean, I think the thing that's built into your book title, and I think a few words that keep coming up in this conversation are this sort of world of infinity, and then authenticity. And I think a lot of ways that becomes sort of the bridge of where trust gets built, and in some, is there trust at scale, which is what I think any of these big companies are succeeding at. And I think often it's a legacy company that has something to work with, that they've sort of learned the lessons of the modern moment. I mean, I think that sort of is, I think, what emotionally surrounds this whole conversation, whether you're a consumer that likes watching TV, film, web series, is that at some point there's sort of this special thing that happened when somebody performed and did something that you liked, and that's what made you love that artist or that creator. I guess, like, I'm just so curious, like, what does this start? And I don't think any of us have this answer, but I think this is what feels important: is what does it look like to enter this new creator economy right now? Like in a world of infinity, in a world where legacy brands now have these like superpowers of AI robots to do what they already do really well. Like if Disney gets the memo, they should be fine. Maybe LEO isn't a hit, but I'm sure, they have other algorithms of what works. I don't know. What does it look like like, did the blogosphere just slowly siphon off bits of the mass, and that's what it looks like? At some point, maybe you get lucky and become, really successful at that. Is there any way to do something new in this super noisy, super infinity landscape? I think that feels like on the one hand, I'm hopeful too. I think creativity is fascinating right now. I think just that what is creative is in rocket boom mode. But what is creative and, in a way to pay a mortgage is the ultimate puzzle to a lot of people that thought they had it worked out for generations with Hollywood. I think that to me feels like the emotional part of this underlying conversation, is that what does this mean to be a new entrant in this environment? How do you succeed?
Yeah, I think it's going to be harder for people who haven't yet built trust to establish it, just because there's going to be so much noise. So I think the trust barrier to entry, the creation barrier to entry will go down, and I think the trust barrier to entry will go up. Yeah, I mean, the only real answer, I think, is to be authentic and to be consistent and perseverant and somewhat hope for the best. I mean, the reality is that as the network gets more crowded, what rises at the top is not necessarily the highest quality. And you'd like to think, oh, well, quality will always win out. And it's like, well, not really, because there's a really interesting study from, I want to say now it might be close to 20 years ago, that this guy named Duncan Watts did. I guess he's an economist effectively, but he and his colleagues set up this experiment with I don't know how many different groups they had, but they basically created a website with like 50, I'll get all these numbers wrong, but it was like 50 songs that no one had ever heard of from 50 artists no one had ever heard of. And they had these different groups, and people were allowed to go and download as many of the songs they wanted. And in some of the groups, you could see what other people had downloaded, and some of them you couldn't. Or I think in one of them you couldn't, and in the other ones you could. And what they found was that in the ones where you could see what other people had downloaded, they all had a different distribution of popularity from each other. That whatever became popular first became the most popular. You have it's called sensitivity to initial conditions, because the first whatever like gets to the top of the list is what the other people who come next will listen to next. And then if they upvote, it's the same reason like you go to Amazon, you look at like the reviews and what has the most upvotes. It's not necessarily the best review. It's actually the one that was one of the earliest ones, right? And that's why it's always at the top of the page and gets upvoted, and it's sort of self-reinforcing. So you have these very powerful positive feedback loops
What
on
happened in the group that
networks.
didn't have the feedback?
There was a distribution of popularity, which you would say is the closest thing to a pure representation of quality, right? Like that was the collective result of each individual person's, evaluation of the quality of the songs. And you might say that was sort of like the baseline level of quality, and then all the other groups differed around that. What they found was like, the songs that were really horrible were always near the bottom, and the songs that were, you saw similar songs kind of near the top, but it was always a different distribution. And so anyway, it just shows that you have this, what are called information cascades, where whatever happens first kind of cascades through the system. And the implication that sometimes things that are, very popular, it's just because they were in the right place at the right time. And there's a lot of luck involved. Which is, if you're a creative and you're pouring your heart onto the page or onto the screen or whatever, it's a little bit disheartening to hear that, but that is sort of the reality. Maybe that's good news for people whose stuff isn't good. If you think your stuff is actually mediocre, maybe you got a shot because you might get lucky. I don't know. There's no great answer. I think there will be new applications. That's another. We talk about this idea of neumorphic and skeuomorphic. What are the completely new things that you can do with AI that would not have been that are just not possible today. And if you're early enough to that, maybe you can be a pioneer in a new form of media. Like that's another opportunity. But yeah, it's going to be the problem with the democratization of creation is that it's going to democratize it for everybody.
I think that's feel a lot of worry about people that it's easy to make this stuff. It's definitely probably even harder to succeed by the old metric.
Yeah.
The irony is that it also is democratizing the creation of the tools, so that the tool companies are also in the same type of a rat race as the creators are.
Well, it's funny, Minh had said that the people who are, what are they doing? And they're, they're creating for agencies, they're creating IP, or they're, educating, right? And you think about Curious Refuge, it might be that the biggest opportunity is actually to educate other people, or to go and try to help traditional media companies who are struggling to stay, current on all this stuff. Like maybe that's the kind of running joke in the broader AI world, of the companies making the most money are like, Accenture, Deloitte, and Bain, BCG, and McKinsey. It's not the actual tool providers. It's the people who are helping everybody use the tools.
I wonder about that. I think if the metaphors of previous foundational shifts in technology, a lot of people talk about cars and as a moment that the world changed after car technology. Like is the better money in the road building? In the ecosystem building, as opposed to like the car manufacturing. And I think that I feel that way about what we've been doing, and I think a lot of ways what you've been messaging is also helping people think about those new ecosystems. So I think it is. My hope is that it is a totally different ecosystem that functions in new dynamic ways, as opposed to hopefully the old one gets a shot in the arm. And I do think, one of our friends at Wallonius on a recent community call, sort of one of his closing thoughts was that the next 6 to 12 months feel like this window that people who are here, or people who are creators early, they still have a bit of a opening that to sort of do something before it really slams down. So that might be a message to the folks that are here, is to sort of use this opportunity, whether you call it arbitrage or first mover status or whatever it is. But like, I think there is something that there's a time right now to maybe not have it all figured out and to maybe jump in. But
that's what I think that, and one of the things that I've noted about being at AI a lot, there are 1,200 people there. It felt like it was kind of everybody in the AI film community was there. Meaning it's got to be pretty small if you can fit everybody into the Culver Theater. And yeah, I think that there's a certain degree of making a bet on yourself, of trying to put yourself at the forefront of this. And yeah, I mean, I think there is a leap of faith, but I don't know. I think it's worth it.
If nothing else, it feels like it isn't the usual definition of crazy of just doing the same thing over and over, which is, I think, what the legacy model is.
Right.
I'm also just now seeing your new post and this idea of the false sense of stability. So it feels like we definitely need to do another episode with you, because these conversations always end in a feeling of positive fog that I feel more empowered to look ahead, but I'm still asking more questions by the time we're done talking for a little while.
Well, and this is what I said in that presentation. The period we're in now, it's really all about asking the right questions. That's all we can do right now.
We're so grateful you jumped into our community this week. I hope you're welcome to lurk there, but we also love it when you jump in, and also grateful to spend more time with you again.
Thanks for the invite.
And hopefully we can get you to one of our Gen Jams. We're doing them everywhere. Minh is literally showing up everywhere on planet Earth right now. So if you're in Antarctica even, he'll find a way to meet you there.
When you're in New York again, let me know.
Yeah, we'll do.
No, actually, there's a few.
We're going to be there in a few weeks.
All right, yeah. Send me the info.
Thank you so much. Honestly, really, I would feel a lot smarter after we get to spend time with you, and glad to have you with us.
Yeah, no, thanks for the great questions.
Thank you, Doug.
And fun conversation.